Johnson. So I wanted to call ourselves calling the meeting to order. We did a roll call and.
All right. Take it away. All right. Good to see you all again today. We have two guest speakers today. One is on his way. One is already here. But before I get to introducing our guest speakers, let me just give you a quick rundown of what we're going to be doing today. We'll have our two presentations today, which will be about 20 minutes with 10 minutes for questions afterwards. After that, we'll take a very short break, stretch our legs for a second, and then come back and we'll look at the pre-work that we had sent out ahead of time. And our goals for the day today will be to navigate over to our phones here. It'll come back up in a second. Our goals for today are going to be...
Everybody see okay? Or you want legs down?
That's good.
This one? Okay. Beautiful.
Yeah. Fairly straightforward, but a lot of information. We're going to understand how amenities such as parks, trails, and open spaces affect the housing mix and affect our quality of life here in town. We sent out one comprehensive plan. For those of you that have been on the village website, you know there are actually two comprehensive plans. Waunakee and Westport's general comprehensive plan, and then a second comprehensive plan, which is unique to a few communities. Waunakee is one of the leaders in this, in my opinion, with a comprehensive plan for parks, trails, pedestrians, and bikes that affects how we as a community envision ourselves and how we envision our use of space. So we're going to start out by talking about that, and Dave Marcoulier is going to give some of his background as a professor from UW-Madison who's been working in this space for a long time and has been with Extension for 20-some years? Yeah, and has worked across the state and has a national reputation for developing those sorts of amenities. So that's what we're going to start out with. Then Steve Deller, who is on his way, is going to be talking with us about regional housing trends. So bringing it from a national perspective with Dave down to what's happening in Waunakee in the Dane County region with regards to housing. And then after the break, we're going to come back and look at that pre-work, and we'll define and characterize what do we mean by affordable, specifically which groups are missing from Waunakee, who's missing from our community from an income perspective based on the data that we see in the U.S. Census. So that's our arc for today. Do you guys have any questions before we get into the meat of things? Any suggestions for the good of the cause? No? All right. Then one more thing I'd like to point out. Some of you have been on the website. Some of us have not been on the website. And let me pull it up right here. It's probably one of the handiest things I've seen in a while for a task force. On the Waunakee.com website, if we go under government and we scroll down, for those of you who haven't visited the website yet, and click on Waunakee Housing Task Force, it takes us to our very own page on the village website. It has contact information for Todd and myself on here, phone numbers. I answer the phone. This is my cell number, so if you're calling me on a Saturday or a Sunday, I'll answer it, and you should feel comfortable calling me at all hours. You guys aren't working this volunteer job regular hours, and I answer the phone whenever people need me to answer the phone. So contact information about our meetings, our location, our agendas. Our most recent agenda will be posted here. And then online meetings, part 1, part 2, we're going to have videos posted of each of the meetings if you want to go back and relive the meeting. Or if you have most likely people that are interested in asking what's been happening at the meetings, we can direct them to here. Everyone's name is listed, so we're well known. And then information that we've distributed. We had our information from our original meeting last week is up here. The meeting packet from this week will be up here. Every meeting's work packet will be up here. And then in addition to that, we're going to be posting some things that might be of interest to the group. The Mount Horeb Housing Study was one of the things that Todd forwarded to me that was really interesting to look at how they've envisioned housing in their community and how their study turned out. Task force meeting, and then some things that were asked for by committee members, the Parks report, the housing inventory and whatnot. So a great amount of information up there. Yeah.
Do we know, is there like an RSS feed or something where we can get notified when it's changed, something's been uploaded? Or is it something we should just go on that probably isn't?
That's a good question. It's probably a question for Julie. Yeah, Julie Help, who's not here right now, but I can find out and I'll let you know.
Okay.
So an RSS feed.
First, yeah, some way to notify that, hey, there's something we might want to look at.
Sounds good. Yeah. Any other questions or suggestions?
I would say that you could, or Todd could, or Julie could, just send an email to everybody's page.
That would work too, yeah.
That works.
That'd be all right? Right.
We can't do it together, we can't send it to one another, but they can send it to us.
All right. But maybe that's how we'll manage it then. RSS feed sounds, I love them. And I'm like, oh, maybe that'll be another layer.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, suggestions? All right. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dave Marcoulier. And Dave has, very excited to have you here, Dave.
I'm sorry.
I'm so very excited to have you here today.
Well, I'm very excited to be here.
So, he's got some great information to share with us and great experience. So welcome.
Thank you, Chris.
Welcome.
I appreciate the invitation. And I'm glad to be speaking before Steve. I have to admit and apologize up front that I don't have a lot of great specific information for the Waunakee area. My work has been kind of broader, and oftentimes I'm drawn farther to the north. But it's okay. What I'd like to do is have just a few takeaway messages today. I'm going to put forward some information here that brings out more of a broad form of value system for evaluating parks, trails, and open space. I'd like to focus on public lands in general and talk a bit about public lands, not only in Wisconsin but elsewhere throughout the Lake States, of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And then I'll be using some examples of recent work that I've been involved with over the course of the past 10 years or so. So to get going here, it's just obvious here that parks, trails, and open space, they're not costless assets for communities. They do cost significant amounts of money. We spend significant local government resources for the development and maintenance of parks. New parks and trails, Waunakee have been around for about 25 years. Waunakee's grown dramatically. New development, it's the time to be investing in parks, trails, and open space when you put in subdivisions. That's the least cost approach to this. New parks and trails often require this transfer of individual rights for the greater public good. Sometimes non-local users can be perceived as a nuisance. So local decision makers rightly ask, what's in it for us? And the basic element here that I'd like to bring forward is a broader array of benefits that are really important to think about for local parks, trails, and open space that counteract the costs associated with developing and maintaining them. Benefits of local parks, trails, and open space, they enhance local quality of life and attract new residents. They stimulate local business receipts. They lead to increases to nearby property values, and they provide ecosystem services and community resiliency. For the past 5 or so years, I've been working in disaster resiliency planning, looking at floods, something we all know something about here in Dane County. Parks, trails often serve as important buffer areas. We oftentimes need to be thinking about where housing is located. We don't want housing to be located where there's any opportunity for flooding to take place. How many people have ever had a basement flood? You have. Is that pleasant? No, it's not. Parks and trails are much better to place in areas that are prone to flooding. So in disaster resiliency planning, outdoor recreation planning is a part of that. This right here is a shot of Cheese Country Trail near Gratiot, Wisconsin. How many people have been down to the Cheese Country Trail? Some people have. Wonderful trail. It's one of the very few trails that's open to motorized users. And it's important in recreation planning to think about compatibility of alternative uses. This is, by the way, also open to bicyclists, but this is not a place where you see many bicyclists, right? Because of general incompatibility between motorized uses and non-motorized uses. Just in terms of compatibility, good proactive outdoor recreation planning needs to take into account the way that certain outdoor recreational uses interact with other outdoor recreational uses. The red there are what would be kind of more in the antagonistic or at least competitive realm. So things like ATV use and cross-country skiing, highly incompatible uses, or snowmobiling and cross-country skiing, highly incompatible uses, right? These are things that we need to separate and segregate. Things like hiking and camping, obviously these are much more compatible uses. We'll get back to this when we talk about a study of the Cheese Country Trail in a bit. Public lands improve local quality of life. They provide key access to key natural amenities that exist. Research suggests that access to natural amenities are central to decisions for in-migration. People want to be able to move to places that are, have forests and water and key natural amenities. It's particularly true for places like Waunakee, these ex-urban or peri-urban regions that are rapidly growing. New residents are often comprised of professionals who commute and retirees. This is a map from Headwater Economics of federal lands, public lands writ large. We think a lot about the western United States, but roughly 30% of the total land area in the U.S. is owned and managed by the federal government. When we get closer to home here in the lake states, that number is smaller, and it includes a much broader kind of set of units of government that are important. Counties are very important public landowners in Wisconsin. Roughly 20% of the total land area in the lake states is public. So what you have there is the dark green being federal, light green being state, and the red being municipal and other types of ownerships. But 20%, it's a large number of acres that are publicly owned. And what I'm interested in is the kind of ability of public lands to stimulate economic and social activity and draw people in. Economic change in proximate communities is increasingly reliant on what takes place on public lands. Public parks as local assets. Local parks are unique in the way that they provide publicly available goods and services. The primary role of parks is typically preserving natural, cultural, and historic resources, but they serve as central aspects of quality of life for local communities. There's broad collective economic, social, and environmental benefits, and visitation to parks creates economic vitality by providing opportunities for local businesses to sell things, goods, and services to people who visit. This right here is the Wisconsin State Park System. We got involved in this over the course of the past 6 or 7 years, looking at the economic impacts associated with the state park system. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but over the course of the past 6 or 7 years, we've seen dramatic declines in state funding for state parks. They've actually zeroed out the general purpose revenue going to state parks. The argument was, well, isn't there a general benefit to state parks that supersedes that? Before 2012 or so, there was about $25 million of state revenue being placed in the state park system, and that's been zeroed out. And one of the issues was what benefit is provided by the state park system. And again, what we were trying to do is come up with this estimate of the impact that visitors have. Key to this is non-locals coming in, spending money in restaurants, retail, admission fees, concessions, and this has a round-by-round effect on local economic activity. The inflow of spending maintains and creates new opportunities for local business and also contributes to local sales tax. And the question there is how much? This is a summary result table, a figure that looks at expenditures for trips to the Wisconsin State Park System. It's broken down by region. You notice that we here in Dane County fall in the Southern Gateways region, which has some of the largest visitation levels of all the state parks in the system. Spending by non-local visitors provides this private sector stimulus to local businesses. It increases local household incomes and provides tax revenues to local governments. Estimates statewide, just over $1 billion is spent by people who visit state parks for their travel. And of that, roughly $580 million is spent by non-local visitors to parks in local regions across Wisconsin. Non-local spending provides 8,200 jobs and roughly 350,000 $350 million in local income. In addition to the simple fact that the state parks provide non-market benefits in the way of legacy conservation, ecosystem function value, option bequest, and existence values. Public trails as local assets, also important. Local trails serve to connect communities. They also provide broad opportunities for outdoor recreation and serve to showcase natural, cultural, and historic resources across our state. They stimulate local business receipts, and they retain and conserve ecosystem function. Again, a lot of these trails end up falling along river courses and serve as a great use of this land that intermittently floods. Even if a flood every 50 years could be devastating if this land wasn't taken out of use for problematic uses that are subject to flooding. This is that Cheese Country Trail again. It goes from Monroe up to Mineral Point. It follows a river course for most of its way. Anybody want to take a guess at what river that is? My favorite name. The Pecatonica, that's right. It's a wonderful showcase of natural amenities, and interestingly enough, it serves as a real important outdoor recreation resource for older people. The average age of people who use this trail are almost 50 years old. If you compare that to trails that are bicycling in nature, that's a much younger demographic. Looking at the results of a study looking at this took place over the course of a year. The study did back in 2011 and 12, and we looked at stratified random sampling of people along this trail, and we asked them a set of questions once they were stopped. And one of them was how much did they spend on their trip. And interestingly enough, the key question here is this is a rails to trails conversion. And because of frac sand, the railroad company wanted to reinsert rail on this line. This has been a pretty actively used, multiple use trail for the past 30 years. And the real question was, how much does recreational use of this corridor contribute to the local economy? And indeed, $15.4 million of spending annually, 13.2 by non-locals, provides significant economic stimulus, and it's helped counter the market-based values of the railroad itself. Trails, like other public lands, may appear costly uses of scarce public resources, but these costs have to be weighed against their equally valid market and non-market benefits, both locals and non-locals. These benefits are typically much less obvious, but often far exceed the costs. So for this, I think they were talking about a $2 million revenue stream, some of which would be local for the railroad as compared to 10 million plus for recreation. So that the obvious need exists to balance, what is it that provides local benefit. In the state park example, over $500 million of spending in state parks for $25 million of state revenue. It doesn't seem to be a bad return on investment, to me at least. Parks also enhance nearby property values. This is not something that's a new concept, but this is a recognition early on in the 1800s that Central Park in New York City had a reasonable expectation to have return on investment. The increase in taxes by reason of the enhancement of values attributable to the park would afford more than sufficient means for the interest incurred for its purchase and improvement without any increase in general rate of taxation. The value of parks and trails need to be thought of as something that will capitalize into the value of the surrounding real estate. This is just a graphic that identifies land value and distance from city parks. It's obvious, well, parks are not parks, right? Inner city parks can have nuisance value, what you see there with decreased market value nearby. The overall takeaway message is that the neighborhood that surrounds these parks will have a net increase in property value due to proximity of the park. There's also even a more dramatic influence of premiums associated with natural amenities when we talk about lakes. And here in Wisconsin, we have a lot of water bodies, not just lakes, but rivers. And this is a graphic that identifies how this capitalized value of the water body ends up being witnessed in a proxy market, such as the real estate market that surrounds it, right? So if we were to control for the value of real estate without the lake, we see very quickly that the presence of the lake has a dramatic impact on the property value. And this has changed dramatically over the course of the past 50 years. Nowadays, it's not unrealistic to think that a lakefront foot will have a value of about $4,000 per lakefront foot. And that's been dramatically increased or appreciated over the course of the past 50 years. Publicly owned lakes and rivers provide dramatic economic influence on local property values. They serve as primary attractions for local residents and visitors. This is Lake Koshkonong down near Edgerton, Wisconsin. This is a mill pond. This is a typical mill pond that we see across Wisconsin. Actually, in the lake states, there's thousands of these that are really forcing communities and regional planning commissions and states to invest significant amounts of money. A lot of these dams were put in back in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. Okay, that would mean that a lot of these are approaching 100 years old and they deteriorate, so there needs to be something done with them. Who can tell me where this is? This is in Dane County. Any guesses?
It's Stoughton.
Stoughton, Wisconsin. Yes, exactly. That's Stoughton. Mill Pond in Stoughton. And I bring these pictures in first. I want you to pay attention to this chute here. What's happening in Stoughton here is a redesign of that area. It needs to have investments, either removal or maintenance. And there's just the past couple of years, they've been developing some conceptual plans. Got involved in this back earlier this year. They're interested in the feasibility of this and the potential economic impacts that this would draw. So that, go back here. This right here will remain. That will be a chute for kayakers. How many people kayak here? A lot of people kayak. Actually, recent demand studies in Wisconsin suggest that roughly 7% of adults in Wisconsin kayak, about 12% canoe, and roughly 20% tube. Okay, so there's a huge, fairly large number of people that like to do this, and this is being developed to try to attract people that would do that. We did kind of a national look at research studies that have assessed kayaking and whitewater parks, and average expenditures are in the area between $50 and $70 per day per kayaker. Okay, this here will cost roughly $2 million to put in, to install, and they hope to have this done through the use of not only city funds but also state funds by 2021. Question that we were asking in the study was, what's the market for this, right? And I said 7% of Wisconsinites kayak. If we just look at kayakers and we recognize the fact that that's probably conservative for the youthful exuberance exhibited in Dane County, probably 7% is low. Actually, in this room, raise your hand again. Is that 7%, Steve? No. More than 7%. Okay, so if we just use the 7% statewide value here, this is Stoughton. It's roughly 30,000 kayakers in that half-hour drive time to Stoughton. Fairly significant number of people. If we look, we extend to 120 minutes or 2 hours, which with marketing could potentially draw some people in, right? The population of kayakers there is 450,000 kayakers. And you can do the math, say $50 a day times 450,000. There's potential here, right? Potential for drawing people into Stoughton and having them spend their money. Water is a real important resource in the lake states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. This is a graphic that looks at the minor civil division level and water resources, not just kind of the number of lakes, but more importantly, lake and riverfront mileage. Okay, lake and riverfront mileage. There's 60,000 of our major rivers and lakes. There's 60,000 miles of lake or riverfront mileage in the lake states. That's a significant amount. Steve and I have worked on this in the past and some other people, but we've looked at this classification of census housing, seasonal, occasional, recreational use. In these 3 states, there's almost 600,000 second homes. And if we just do conservative expansions of value, there's more than $120 billion of value invested just in second homes, these seasonal, occasional, recreational housing units. And they spend on average in local regions $10 billion a year. So a significant amount of economic value coming from our publicly owned waters if we think about the activities of the real estate that surrounds them. So in conclusion, my 20 minutes are up and I'm going to give the floor to Steve here, but I just wanted to leave you with the simple fact that parks and trails and open space and water, publicly owned, are important local assets. They motivate an infusion of private sector stimulus. They enhance local quality of life. They increase local property values. And they provide non-marketed benefits. Actually, the reason that they exist is because of the non-market benefits. Legacy, conservation, ecosystem, function, value, option, bequest, and existence values. With that, I'm going to shut up. And I like using this as my last slide. It's a place I know very well. The question that I ask when I look at this is I'd be sitting there next to the campfire, where's that boat? Where's the boat? In the water. In the water, it's out fishing, right? With that, I'm going to open up for questions.
Dave, question, top of our agenda, we're here about housing. How does parks relate to housing? Give me the, I'm waiting for the punchline here, how it matters.
Again, I had an issue with Christine. I don't have specific information that would help us understand the Waunakee housing stock with respect to natural amenities. But you're changing rapidly, right? You're growing. You're turning farmland into residential developments. The takeaway would be take the time up front to make sure that these subdivisions have open space, trails, parks, sidewalks. This is one thing that I can't understand why developments get put in without sidewalks, but sidewalks are so important for the public use, right, of a community neighborhood. Health benefits, there's all sorts of benefits associated with sidewalks. The punchline, I don't know that I have a great punchline, but as you develop new residential subdivisions, make sure you build in open space, parks, trails, and sidewalks. How's that? It's a lot easier to do up front than it is after the fact. I can tell you that, right? People, once they don't have a sidewalk, they're not willing to spend the money to put in a sidewalk. Same with flood. Same with flood issues in the community resiliency, right? The time to think about disaster resiliency is when you put these neighborhoods in. You don't want to put in, you want to make sure that the open space is consistent and congruent with where flooding will take place.
So, Dave, one of the things that, some of the literature I've been reviewing about the need for green space, for spaces to be pleasant regardless of how much people can afford to pay for an apartment or a condominium or whatnot. So balancing that with the fact that it costs the same to put a foot of curb and gutter in and a foot of sidewalk or a yard of sidewalk in a development where the housing goal price is $150,000 versus $350,000. One of the challenges is going to be, how do we mitigate that? How do we make sure that in the communities where, or the neighborhoods where we're looking at affordable development, we're not saying that those neighborhoods get developed without sidewalks or without curb and gutter or without equal access to park space and walkability. So the importance, and one of the reasons I wanted Dave to come here, is to talk about the importance of that green space and that kind of holistic look at housing as being more than just the four walls and the roof over our head, which is incredibly important, but it's more than just that shelter from rain. Yeah.
Good.
And how we prioritize and balance that.
So in other words, you're talking about quality of life.
Yeah, and that affordable housing, and this I said with this, I was not going to say an opinion last week, but I'll give an opinion. Affordable housing that has a quality of life that people are going to feel is worthwhile. And that's taken from what you all said last week, or last month too.
And open space as buffers for resilient communities are really important. I like to tell people, pay me now up front or pay me later. You're going to pay me later by poor planning, right? By having flooding take place in inappropriate situations, right? Pay me now up front. It's a lot easier to put sidewalks in up front than it is to come in afterwards.
Thank you, Dave.
Very good.
Thank you. You did? All right. All right. All right. Sharon
You're
and
too quiet. You're too quiet. You're like an 8 o'clock class.
Your 8 o'clock classes, not your chattiest classes?
I don't do 8 o'clock classes because I can't. I'm so asleep.
All right, here we go. We're gonna switch it over. All right. And you without a mouse, as long as that's not okay. There you go. So Steve Geller and I work together in the Center for Community and Economic Development, but his primary home is in agricultural and applied economics in the College of Agriculture and Life Science. And I've done so much work around the idea of affordable housing and other issues. And Steve is also one of 2 people leading a housing discussion group that is happening across the state for UW Extension right now. So Steve's going to bring this in to more locally what's been happening with the region of Dane County and in and around Waunakee. So we talked about parks and the importance of green space and trails and maintaining quality of life with affordable housing. Now we'll bring it down to some of the trends that are happening in our area.
Uh-oh, there we go. Good evening. Please don't let me just ramble on. You know, the last thing you want to do is let an economics professor just kind of ramble on. You don't want me to do that. So if I say something that doesn't make sense, please ask. Or if you want me to elaborate on something a little bit more, ask me to do. What I want to try to do is to kind of give an overview of what's happening with the retail housing market and some issues to think about. Okay? Does that look familiar? Does that look like a walkable community?
Yeah.
Okay. Walk, yeah, it's a walk. Could you, if you lived in that front house right there, could you walk to the neighborhood town and get a burger and beer?
You could have been on walk though.
Well, you probably just get your car and drive. Okay. Could you walk and get a gallon of milk someplace?
No. Neighbor's house.
Hmm?
Go to the neighbor's house.
Hey, that's cheating. No more from you. Okay? A lot of times when we talk about walkability, it's more than just simply putting in sidewalks. Okay? But that's really kind of a minimum requirement. A lot of what Dave was talking about is really kind of amenities and quality of life. Kind of what makes this place special. Okay? Looking out the window here, there's a creek battling through there, right? That's pleasant. That's enjoyable. That is much better than the view outside my office window, which is a concrete parking lot. Okay? So you want to take advantage of things like that when you do this, because Dave is right. It's easier to build these into new developments than it is to go back and go, damn, we need to do this, okay? So when you think about quality of life, you really got to think about housing in terms of the types of housing that you want, but also in terms of what the ambiance of the neighborhood is that you want. Now the problem sitting on top of all that is that that can be very expensive, and that can lead into affordable housing issues. When I lived in Maine, the idea is that, well, what people want is open space, so we have 40-acre minimum lot sizes. Okay? Basically, people in Maine don't want to have neighbors. Well, if you eat up in 40-acre lots, what happens to the supply of housing? You hit a wall really fast. Okay? As people move into the area because of the nice high amenities, okay, what happens to the price of housing? Boom, shoots through the roof. Okay? So you got to kind of think these things through. And it's better to take your time and think it through than it is to build something, and I hope nobody's neighborhood is in that shop, or house is in that shop. But, you know, kind of looking back and going, damn, I wish we had done this a little bit differently. So it's better to take your time and slow down and think through it. But what I want to talk about is really what's happening to the housing market. Okay? Housing right now is a really, really hot issue. Okay? This is some recent headlines out of the paper. The Post-Present, first-time home buyers are struggling in a tight housing market. Supporting leaders worry to address housing shortages, 3,000 jobs to fill, but not enough places to live. One of the things that I hear a lot of our UW Extension County educators talking about is communities, much like yourselves, that are worried about housing. And what's bringing them to thinking about this is that they're creating jobs, but yet people aren't moving into the community to take the jobs. And the conclusion is that, well, why aren't they moving in? Well, it must be the housing stock. And when they look at it, they find that their housing stock is of one of two types. Either very nice, very expensive, or it's a piece of crap. Okay? It's not very good. This is something that Dave and I have been trying to work on, is housing issues, housing stress. And one way to think about housing stress is the quality of the housing. And we've been using some indicators, but the problem that we got in Wisconsin is that that's not a crappy house, that's a fishing cabin. How do we separate the two? We can't. So that's why I'm turning to Dave and hope Dave has a magic idea that can help me figure out how to do that. Because we build these indices and then we look at Wisconsin and it's like these hot spots of really crappy housing, and then you look at Dave's map of recreational housing, it's like it's the same map. Okay? So, but that's an issue that a lot of communities are dealing with right now. Okay? Wisconsin Public Radio, rural areas are feeling the squeeze as rent rises in Wisconsin's remote rural areas. It's not just a city problem, it's a rural problem as well. The Star, workforce housing, closing affordable housing gap with residents that help employees and businesses. This is something that I'll close with, is think about the person who works in Waunakee. Can the person who works in Waunakee afford to live in Waunakee? Okay. Philosophically, yes. Okay. What's the average wage rate in Waunakee?
People who are hiring right now are $11 an hour.
$11 an hour? I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. Okay, but that's an issue that's being brought up. In Milwaukee, they're saying it's not high rents, it's crappy jobs. That's the problem in Milwaukee. Okay, we got lots of housing, and it's pretty affordable. But the jobs that we have in Milwaukee can't afford to pay for these modestly priced housing. So we can get really complex really quickly here when we start talking about housing affordability. Okay? But what's happening in the housing market? This is an index of housing price transactions. This is quarterly data. It goes all the way back to 1975. And this is, the US is the blue line, Wisconsin is the red line. And you can see that dash line in there is kind of a linear line. Doesn't that look like kind of a bubble? And guess what happened to the bubble? It burst. Okay? I could spend the next 2 hours talking about the financial mess and how that bubble popping led to the Great Recession. Okay? I'm not going to do that. Wisconsin experienced a little bit of one, but not nearly as much. You can see the housing bubble kind of popping. It did for Wisconsin, but not nearly as bad. One of the concerns that we've got right now is that are we heading for another bubble? Okay? And this is a concern that we have in Wisconsin, is that housing prices are starting to escalate again. It's like what happened in the early 2000s. Are we experiencing that same thing today? And if we are, why? Okay, I think I know why. Okay? This is Wisconsin and the Madison metropolitan area. This is the Madison metro area. So it's, what's in Madison metro? Dane County, Iowa County,
Yeah, Columbia,
Columbia.
Sauk,
Is Sauk in it?
portion of Sauk, Green.
So it is basically all the contingent counties.
Basically, but it doesn't count all the counties, it's portions of those counties.
Okay. So you go 5 miles north of here, that's metropolitan. Think in your mind, what's 5 miles north of here? Farmland. All right, well, that's classified as metropolitan. There's no way we collect the data. But you can see what's happened with the Madison metro area is that it's actually, it corrected, but it didn't correct nearly as much. You can see that kind of come down, but not nearly as much as the rest of the state, and not even close to what happened at the national level. And you can see it accelerating off again. Okay, so the housing market, in terms of housing prices, is pretty strong around here, and I'm sure that's exactly what you're seeing. These are some of the other metropolitan areas, Green Bay Metro, the Sheboygan area, the Madison area, Duluth, and the green one is Milwaukee. Something is happening in Duluth. I have no idea what's happening in Duluth. Dave, you drive through Duluth when you go to your property. What's happening in Duluth?
Good question, Steve.
It's the amenity of the lake, right? Lake Superior is a good swimming lake, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Something's happening with Duluth. I thought about maybe taking that one off there, but I thought I'd put it up there to say that there's really a lot of spatial variation across the U.S. when we talk about housing markets. But the Madison area, of which Waunakee is part of, is actually performing fairly strong. No, I'm not going to pick on that. Now, this is what I think is happening. This is the number of new housing starts, building permits. This goes back, it only goes back to 1988. It's monthly. So it doesn't go quite as far back, it doesn't go back to the 75. But look at this average level of new housing starts. All right, look at this average here. Okay, and this is for Wisconsin. There's the Great Recession. Where is it now? Why hasn't it gone back up to where it was before the Great Recession? It should have.
I don't think wages have kept up.
Wages may not have kept up. That's perhaps. But I think part of what's happening here is that its demand is responding, but supply is not keeping up with it. Okay? We're not seeing the amount of building going on in Wisconsin. So this, to me, would be, why aren't we seeing more housing being constructed? And this is multi-unit and single unit. There's always more multi-units going up. Yes?
So the previous graphs were cost then, and then this is...
Those were prices.
Okay.
Prices, cost.
Yeah.
Cost of the buyer, revenues to the seller. Okay.
Yep.
But you would think, you would think with that responding as strongly as it is, you would think that the builders would be responding and building more. But for some reason they're not. Okay? That's Wisconsin. This is the Madison metropolitan area. Okay? You still see the same pattern. For multi-units, it's picked up a little bit. Okay? For single, unit, it's not quite back up to where it was, but it's not nearly as bad as the state of Wisconsin. There is some argument that people kind of came through the Great Recession in the housing market with kind of a bad taste in terms of home ownership. But a lot of folks are making the conscious decision they don't want to own, they want to rent. How many of you own your home? Okay, so we have very few renters in the room. Okay? Increasingly, people are deciding that they would rather rent, particularly baby boomers. Now, why would baby boomers want to rent?
They don't want the responsibility.
They don't want the responsibility. They want the flexibility. You know, they want to be able to move about and enjoy life a little bit more. Okay? The other thing is that how many of you got kids that are just coming out of college, graduating college? Do they have student debt? Okay. How much are they able to put down on a house with the amount of student debt that they have? That's a research question that we want to try to tackle. We're interested in terms of new business startups. Young people coming out of college aren't able to buy houses, buy cars, and start businesses because they have too much debt. And we want to, lots of things going on here. So the Madison area seems to have responded a little bit better. Okay? Housing stress. There's, you know, when you get into the housing literature and you start looking at these kind of rules of thumb that are dominant throughout the real estate market, nobody knows where those came from. They just kind of came out of thin air. Okay? So, one of the rules that came out of thin air is this 2836 rule. Basically, mortgage lenders say that what they look at is they look at your gross income and they figure out how much can you afford to pay on housing. It's somewhere between 28 and 36%. Okay? As a general rule, you shouldn't pay more than 30% of your gross income on housing. If you're more than that, you're kind of defined as being in stress. Now, where did that number came from? No, it didn't. But it's the number that we're using. Okay? So, for example, if you earn $5,000 a month, that means your monthly house payment should be no more than $1,250. That also includes insurance, heating, utilities. So anything that's related to your housing costs, okay, should fall under that category. If you're spending more than that on that much income, you're experiencing stress. Now, where are we seeing stress? The areas that are darker is seeing higher levels of stress. This is 35% threshold, so this is a little bit higher than this 30%. Okay? You can see Chicago, Central Illinois isn't that bad. Iowa isn't that bad. Why would Central Illinois and Iowa not be that bad? See, I can do this. I went to school in Central Illinois. Why would you think there's not much stress?
Are those like generational farms and they already own the land outright, so the
Yeah.
payments are much?
Yeah.
It's a lot of open land there.
Cheaper land.
And there's wind farms down there now.
Well, who wants to live Who wants to live in Central Illinois? Trust me, I got families there. Okay? You can see that through the Great Plains, that you can see all that. That's basically an amenity-driven effect. Okay? It's a negative amenity. People don't want to live there. Look at Colorado. Fairly stressed. Why? People want to live there. California, I don't see how people can afford to live in California. Have you, any of you ever been to San Francisco? Have you ever, just out of curiosity, looked at the rental market? Oh my God! How can people afford to live there? My daughter just moved to Boston. Oh my God! It's mind-boggling. So when you look at those coastal areas, they're really highly stressed. The southern states are stressed because that's an income issue. Chicago's stressed. Wisconsin's kind of in the middle there. Wisconsin's kind of maybe starting to face a little bit of an issue here. Okay? This is the ratio of owner-occupied housing value to median household income. If it's in the blue, it's kind of below that threshold level. If it's in the red, it's kind of above that threshold level. Again, same kind of a pattern appears. Okay? Same kind of pattern appears. Wisconsin is kind of right on that edge between being stressed. This is rent, as opposed to home ownership cost. This is rent cost. Rent cost is much higher. Generally, if you're in the rental market, people that are in the rental market generally are lower income and they're more housing stressed, okay? Because they just don't have the income level. And they don't have a choice, they have to be in the rental market. And you see a lot higher levels of stress related to the rental market. Okay? Now, what about some specific to Waunakee? Okay, this is from the American Community Survey. This is 2000 compared to 2010, and then the most recent data, which is a 5-year average. And you can kind of see how there is kind of a large growth there between 2000 and 2010. Okay, so that's pretty strong growth in the number of housing units. Okay. This is a comparison between occupied housing units and vacant housing. You can actually see the percent there is that gray bar. That's the percent vacant. You don't have a whole lot of vacant housing here. Most of the vacant housing is probably because someone has put it up on the market, they've moved, and the new person hasn't moved in yet. That's where a lot of the vacancy is. Or it's a brand new spec home, and the owner hasn't moved in yet. Okay? This is the housing vacancy rate, or not vacancy, housing vacancy. I should have changed the title on that. That title's wrong. That's what you get when you cut and paste your graphics. Owner occupied is the blue chart. Renter occupied is kind of that orange chart, and the percent rental is that gray chart in the middle. In 2000, over half of the households in Waunakee were in rental units. Today, it's down to 30%. Okay, that's a pretty big drop. And now the question is that because, is that demand driven? Is that people don't want to rent as much in Waunakee, they'd rather own? Or is it supply driven in terms of the type of housing that is being built? Okay. Owner occupied versus renter occupied versus vacant, Waunakee compared to Wisconsin. Okay? Notice in terms of rental, Wisconsin is a bit higher than Waunakee, but not that much higher. But look at the owner occupied. Okay? And the vacant. Why do you think this vacancy rate is so high? I'll give you a hint. Dave showed you a map.
Second homes.
Bingo. Second homes. So how do we factor out second homes out of this? Should we factor it out? It's one of those kind of things that, you know, it's just when you look at this stuff, you got to kind of think about why that might be. Okay. Okay, now, this is the age of the housing stock. This is Waunakee compared to Madison, compared to Stoughton. I picked Stoughton because that's about the equal distance from Madison in the opposite direction. So when you think of kind of, you know, Madison is this 800-pound gorilla, right? What's a fair comparison? Well, what's the community to the north and community to the south? Okay. So if you look at Waunakee, these are the older homes. Obviously, Stoughton has the oldest housing stock. Okay. With some new development occurring in the 1990s. But basically, it's really kind of an older housing stock with the wave that occurred in the 1990s. Madison is pretty evenly distributed. Why do you think it's so low in the 1940s here? World War II. Okay, World War II. Okay. But where's most of the housing stock in Waunakee? It's relatively new. Okay. relatively new. So this is a lot of new growth that's been occurring recently. Those most recent numbers, these are census averages, so I wouldn't get too upset with that number in there because they're averages. Okay. Now, housing stock, renter occupied. Same thing, Stoughton kind of is, in terms of renter, this is Stoughton, is kind of an older one. Again, that building boom period. Waunakee, there's a lot of rental development in the 1990s. When I think of Waunakee, I can't picture where that is.
Isn't it by Heritage? Heritage also, housing going up, and then there's some of the newer subdivisions have.
Part of it's spread around the community in duplexes.
Yes.
You don't see 'em.
Yes.
They don't see
Well, it
rental.
depends. Is it a rental or is it owner occupied?
What are those?
Some of them change their time. Yeah, so there's.
And that was a big, that was a
That
big thing that happened in the 1980s, is that a lot of apartment complexes were converted into condos. And there were a lot of people that didn't want to buy, but they were kind of forced into it, and that was a big to-do. Okay? So a lot of this is you saw this kind of artificial shift because you just had this movement of, well, you're not going to rent anymore, you're going to buy. And if you don't buy, get out. Okay? Now what about housing values? This is housing values. I thought about cutting it off here because so many of these really smaller categories, there's hardly anything there. But what jumps out at me here is that, again, Stoughton seems to have, most of its housing stock is below 300,000. A lot of its housing stock is actually below 175,000, okay? The spike in the middle is that 200 to 249, 250 range for Madison, Stoughton, and Waunakee. But look at Waunakee. Okay? There's a fair amount of really high-end homes in Waunakee compared to some of our neighboring communities.
Is this sold rate, or is this the, like?
See, this is a problem because this is the American Community Survey.
Okay.
And this is what people report, is they think is the value of their house.
Okay.
So those of us that do housing studies like this is all based on what you think your house is worth, because that's what you report. Okay? How many of you think you really have a very good feel for what your house is worth? If you were to put it on the market today, what you would get? So these data from Waunakee are really good. Folks in Stoughton know what they're talking about, so Stoughton numbers are real good. Okay? But this, over 300,000. Okay, that's pretty high-end housing. That's fine if that's what you want. Okay? Now, this is the percent of households, owner-occupied, that is spending more than 30% of their income by income category. Notice in Waunakee that those folks that are making $75,000 or more, it's about a little over 4%. That doesn't seem like that much. Okay? It doesn't seem like that much. But now notice the scaling over there. All these are less than 10%. They're talking about single digits. Now, here's the same chart for rental. Notice the change in the percentages over there. Okay? Most of the folks, very few folks in these higher income categories are rental stressed because rent tends not to be as expensive as owning a house. But look at these lower income levels. Less than $20,000, $20,000 to $35,000. In Waunakee, it's about 10%. When you get into Madison, it's actually pretty high. Okay? Now, I'm not sure how they count the students in this. I'm not sure about that. Most of the students would actually be zero or negative income because they don't work. Okay, they're accumulating debt. Okay?
So is the no cash rent, what is that? Is that like living with parents or?
That would be, I own an apartment complex and my daughter lives there and I don't charge her rent. Or my mother-in-law lives there, I don't charge her rent. Okay. Now, this is where there's a lot of information here. But what I want to try to do with this is that this is the distribution of household income for the city of Waunakee. Okay? And what it's basically saying is that about, you can't really see it here, that's a little bit different, right? About 50% of households are making less than $100,000. A little less than 50% are making more than $100,000. You got some folks that are making $200,000. Okay? Now, if you use this 30% rule and you use that upper limit of these categories, these are the estimated annual housing costs that the folks in these income categories might be able to spend. For the lowest level, less than $10,000, the maximum annual housing cost is about $3,000. That's $250 per month. Can you rent very much for $250? Okay. Can you rent much for $375? So you start to run into a problem here with these lower income folks. Okay. They simply can't afford to pay rent. Now, I asked before when we started, what are the types of jobs that are being generated in Waunakee? What's the typical hourly wage? I think you said $13.
No, there are less than everything that's listed on Main Street. McDonald's is looking, Kentucky Fried's looking. They're
So
all
you really got,
advertising at 11.
so what's happened is we're getting a schism. We're getting a lot of jobs that are higher end, and we're getting a lot of jobs that are lower end. Those
manufacturing jobs at North, they pay really well.
15 to 18.
No, that's actually.
See, but increasingly, we're hearing that $15 an hour is a pretty good paying job. Okay? Now, let's think about that. If this is a full-time job, right? 40 hours a week, 52 weeks out of the year, they get 2 weeks vacation. No, 50 weeks a year, 52 weeks vacation. And you use the 30% rule, the monthly housing cost should be about $750. How many apartments or houses can you live in Waunakee for $750?
Zero. No, there are a number of apartments on Division Street that are $675, $700.
Not what I was looking for.
No, I was going to say my son lives on Division and the older ones that were built in the 80s.
Yes.
And those are $750 to $800 a month now.
My grandson lives here.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? This single income is not dual income. So if you had 2 people making $15 an hour, then you could double it.
Right.
Okay.
So if you have 8 students living in a small house.
When you're thinking about affordable housing, what defines the threshold for affordable housing? If you decide we want to invest in affordable housing, go, okay, define affordable for me. Depending on what threshold you use, you can end up with a very different definition. Okay? Affordable housing on the north side of Chicago is $5,000 a month. That's also where you find the Ferrari dealerships, the Rolls-Royce dealerships, and the Bentley dealerships. Okay? Very different. Okay? So what are some of the issues to consider? When a community is concerned about low-income housing, okay, is that the issue? Is it low income? Question, can a majority of people who work in Waunakee afford to live in Waunakee? Okay? Because of the types of jobs that are being generated, many of the jobs that are being generated, this is more of a low-income housing issue. Okay? If the community is concerned about affordability, what's defines affordability. It really depends on the level of income that you're thinking about. Okay? Doesn't include low income. Okay? Think about walkability. We're going to come back to this. Okay? Think about walkability of the community. Research strongly suggests that walkability, it's in a form of an amenity, is increasingly important to overall quality of life and sense of community. I've been doing a lot of work on social capital, people's connections to each other, how much they share, how much they connect with each other, how much information do they share with each other, how much they trust each other, how much they support each other, okay? And I'm doing it in terms of kind of how that affects economic development and economic growth. But if you go in and you look at the planning literature, for example, they talk about it in terms of that sense of community within a particular place. And something like walkability really matters a lot. Okay? That ability to kind of get out and meet your, take the dogs for a walk, go down to the park, take the kids down to the park, walk to the local place and get a burger and a beer. Okay? Those types of things really, really matter a lot. I wanted to, I'm doing it. I wanted to put that picture back up there. Okay? And say, is this really, now this could be, this is, you could say this is exactly what we want. This is a walkable community, we have sidewalks. There's actually a park back there that you don't see in this picture with a baseball diamond and a playground. But these are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about. And as you're doing this kind of development, think about what kind of income levels are we talking about? Because those income levels are really going to drive a lot of this kind of development. It might be that we want to have this kind of development, but we want it to be a little bit more affordable, so guess what? We're going to make them townhouses. That's going to drive the cost down a little bit. So there's lots of different strategies and lots of different ways to go about thinking this. And there's no right or wrong answer, because what you decide for your community is really up to you. And I'm probably way over my time. I'll take all that pictures so that you know.
What questions do we have for Steve? All right.
We don't know.
We don't know nothing.
We can't decide, let's go. Is there a way that you can get back to, well, it's like page 9 that we had here. It's the one where you talk about Waunakee household income and then household distribution, the annual housing size. Really, that might be at the second from the end. You go, it's second from the end.
It's the one with the...
It's this one. That one. Got it. And then if you go to that, okay, so we've got these other slides that talk about income, and they probably haven't seen that we have. Income in Waunakee and where we sit in that. And this slide just kind of struck me a little bit, because when you're talking about medians, things like that, it says that 50% of all households in Waunakee have incomes below $99,000, which seems, is that what that other information showed us? I mean, was it close to that?
It said 90.
It seemed like it was almost close when you were looking at some of the Waunakee median income by a household, and it just really strikes me that it's $100,000.
That's the median?
Yeah.
Well, that's
what it says.
I think if you add these up, add these percentages up, it's like 53%. See, the problem with this is that you could have 3 households that have $2 million in income a year, and you know what that does to the average?
Yeah.
Move.
Yeah, right.
That's why a lot of times you look at median.
Yeah, it controls something. Yeah. I just wanted to point it out because as you pop that in, I was looking at it, I thought it somewhat correlates with some of the other information that we have, and the only concern is, you know, in our community, when we're looking at just our community, that's the number. So if we're looking for ideas about making housing affordable or providing for housing that is affordable, we got to figure out who it's being aimed at. I don't think it's being aimed at that. Those groups can find housing.
Developers are aiming at that. My brother-in-law is a developer. Well, do we know him? No. He's in the Chicago market. And he's always doing these high ends. And it's like, Ed, why don't you do multiple? He just goes, the markup on a high end is so much higher. It's just, I make a lot more money doing one high-end home than I do doing 10 or a dozen affordable housing. The cards are stacked for developers to go after this high end. Because think of the markup. You know, I can mark up, if I'm putting in a $50,000 kitchen, right, as opposed to a $10,000 kitchen. Think about the markup that I as a developer can put on that $50,000 kitchen. And homeowners in this kind of a market, they don't even bat an eye.
Do they ever worry that they're going to run out of people in that kind of a market?
I'll worry about that tomorrow. The U.S. has a what economists call very high discount rate. Would you rather have a hamburger today or 2 hamburgers 3 days from now? You ask that question in America, guess what? We want that burger today. You ask that question in Europe or Asia, they'll wait. We want it, and that's just the way that we are.
I know that during that heavy growth period, like the early 90s, mid-90s, somewhere in there were a lot of people that were moving into the Midwest, us included, that were being transferred from their jobs on the coasts and big city areas. They were selling dinky little houses for $4 million, coming here to Waunakee and not wanting to pay taxes on all of that. So they put it into the biggest houses they could find to save money.
If we find this sometimes with university professors, we'll recruit somebody from, say, the San Francisco area, and they come to Madison, and their eyes just go, oh my God, I can buy a McMansion on the lake. Why? Because they have a little house in Berkeley that they could sell for $3 million. And that's a little house in Berkeley. Now, what can you buy in the Madison market for $3 million?
Maple Bluff, nice house on the lake.
If I was in their shoes, I'd do the exact same thing.
But that was all part of that bubble and what was happening with people as they were being moved from place to place to place, and their companies were paying to move them, and they were coming to the Midwest. And I think that's part of the reason there's a bubble now. We again have people coming from the coasts and from the larger cities looking in the smaller Midwest areas and in those markets, and that's driving things up again here.
That's right, because if you go back and you look at these, not that one, this one's fine. You're right, if you're coming in from, you know, kind of the Washington, D.C. up to the Boston area, or you're coming in from the West Coast, and you're moving into the Midwest, housing here is dirt cheap.
And at the time, you got to pay a whole lot more taxes on the money that they got from their sell, unless they put it into a new buy to get rid of most of it. Now, some of that has changed, but that was a big incentive at the time. And Waunakee was right for it.
Yeah. And you're still, because Madison is continuing to grow.
Yeah.
And it's growing, a lot of the growth is heading south towards Verona because of Epic.
Right.
Okay? But
downtown Madison, East Wash.
It's all now. It's, I mean, if you look, if I was 20 years younger and I had a lot of money, I'd be buying up farmland around here. Because it's purely on speculation. Unfortunately, I'm too old to do that, and I don't have that kind of money. Because my daughter now lives in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Steve, for coming and sharing with us today and giving us some things to think about. How we can maintain quality of life when we're talking about affordability, and what does affordability look like. And I think, Tom, your question is what we're going to address next, is who's missing from Waunakee based on what we see here. Yeah. Do you guys want to stand up and stretch your legs for a few seconds? Yeah, bathroom break. We'll get going in about 3 or 4 minutes again.